One has gone out from you who plots evil against Yahweh and is a counselor of Belial. So most English translations here will render the ending of this verse as either wicked or worthless. The counselor of wickedness or the worthless counselor, something like that. And that's what all of the English Bibles will do, something like that. But the Hebrew word there is Belial. And as verse 7 told of the goodness of Yahweh, this verse introduces the evil of his opponent. And some scholars have suggested that Belial is the Hebrew equivalent of the Babylonian goddess Belial, who is the goddess of the underworld. This word Belial actually occurs throughout the historical books, not incredibly frequently, but fairly frequently. And one such occurrence is in 2 Samuel 22, verse 5, and the Net actually translates this in a pretty interesting way. They translate a phrase, and I'll read the entire verse, but the Net translates the phrase as the currents of chaos. So I'll read it here. 2 Samuel 22, verse 5 and 6 says, "The waves of death engulfed me, the currents of chaos overwhelmed me. The ropes of Sheol tightened around me, the snares of death trapped me." So there's clearly and obviously underworld imagery there, death imagery, and right in the middle of it we have the word Belial, and the Net translated it as the currents of chaos. So I thought that was interesting, as the name of our channel here is As the Chaos Dies, and we do find the imagery and the symbolism there pretty interesting. So I thought that was a really interesting translation that they did for Belial there. And in the Sibylline oracles, Nero is called Belial. So this would obviously be in the lifetime of Peter and Paul, that Belial was applied to Nero. And previously in the Second Temple Jewish writings, Belial is the proper name for Satan. And Paul seems to agree with this linkage, as 2 Corinthians 6, verse 15, Paul says, "What agreement does Christ have with Belial, or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever?" So at a minimum, Belial here in Nahum is a personification of evil, because scholars argue that Belial didn't become the proper name for Satan until the Second Temple period. But I believe that Nahum's usage of the designation Belial set the stage for later Jewish writings, which developed the term into Satan's name. So as I mentioned, the word Belial occurs fairly frequently in the historical books, but Nahum is the only prophet that uses the title, which is very interesting, because it does become a prominent title later, up through even the time of Paul, as that becomes again the name of Satan. And in the days of Nahum, it's the womb of wickedness that was Nineveh that birthed this evil. Because Nahum says, "Out from you has gone one who plots against Yahweh, the counselor of Belial." This one comes forth from Nineveh. And he is a type of the Antichrist, or possibly the false prophet. So it's interesting here that we have the counselor of Belial, and then later on in verse 15 we'll actually have Belial himself. So I wonder if the counselor of Belial could be viewed as the false prophet of Revelation, and then Belial be viewed as the beast. So that's one of my own suggestions there, that here in Nahum we have both the false prophet and the beast being mentioned. "Now I will break his rod from off thee." And the rod is the picture of a slave master standing over the captive with an upraised rod or staff. It's the rod of oppression that will now be broken. And in the immediate context, this would be, or seem to be, a proclamation to Judah that they will be set free from Assyrian oppression. However, the rod of Assyria would quickly be replaced with that of Babylon. So is that really what Nahum is talking about? is the point that he's making, hey guys, the rod of Assyria is going to be broken and the shackles are going to be removed. But I think it was very little time, but just in a few years, Babylon's going to come and they're going to enslave us and burn the temple down. Is that really the point Nahum's making? I don't believe so. I think, again, here, this is ultimately eschatological. That Nahum, as he's been talking about the counselor of Belial and Belial, that Belial will be completely cut off in verse 15. And it's the counselor of Belial that we've been looking at here before. So, has this happened? Has Belial been cut off? Has he been destroyed ultimately? My answer to that is no. Satan is still around. Belial is still around. But Nahum also never specifically said that Belial is Assyria. And especially adopting the later view of what Belial represents, the personification of evil. So even scholars that don't want to say that Belial here is Satan, because that idea developed later, they still say that Belial here is the personification of evil. So, is evil still around? Has evil been fully destroyed? Has the yoke or the rod of evil, the shackles of sin, the shackles of evil, have those been completely destroyed? I don't believe so. But again, Nahum never specifically said that Belial was Assyria. So if we adopt this broader view, the vagueness of the language causes us to look farther and deeper for the ultimate fulfillment. So again, this is another eschatological prophecy in Nahum. The cutting off of Belial will happen. It just hasn't happened yet. Ultimately, the yoke and the rod and the shackles will be broken and ripped off, and humanity will be reinstituted in the new heavens and the new earth and all that. But it hasn't happened yet. Now, we need to be very clear that evil, Belial, Satan, the powers of darkness were defeated at the cross. They have been defeated, but they have not yet been executed. They have not yet been cut off in the sense of sent to the lake of fire, destroyed. The finality of that has not happened. This is yet future. So the Lord then makes a statement about the grave of this worthless one. And most read the Hebrew as it stands and translate the phrase as, quote, I will make your grave. But some suggest revocalizing the text to read, quote, I will desecrate your grave. And again, here the net goes with that option, the net scholars in their translation. They translate that as, I will desecrate your grave because you are accursed. So the king of Assyria's grave was allegedly protected by the Assyrian gods, but Yahweh easily destroys this grave nonetheless, and the curse then is placed upon the Assyrian king and his gods. And God himself will make the grave to bury the Assyrian. It won't be left to another. So Dr. Spronk and all the commentators that I read, they prefer to leave the Hebrew, leave the Masoretic as it stands and not make that revocalization. So they prefer the reading as, I will make your grave. And Dr. Spronk says the preparation of the grave, his eternal home, is the consequence of the loss of the support from his gods, who have been destroyed in their own houses, the temples. He cannot withstand the God of Judah, end quote. And in the eschatological context of Nahum, this will ultimately be a promise to the beast and or Satan. And for this, we go back to Isaiah 14, I'm going to read a few verses, and there's a few places where I'm going to break into comment, so I won't read it straight through, but it's Isaiah 14:18-21. And it says, "All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out, away from your grave like a loathed branch." So here's the first time I'm going to break in here, this phrase, loathed branch. Some scholars believe that here Isaiah is using an Egyptian loanword. And this Egyptian loanword means abominable dead god. So if that's correct, this would read, "You are cast out away from your grave like an abominable dead god." Now, I think that's a very interesting option, but I also think that the Hebrew makes sense because of the fact that the Messiah, Jesus, is called the branch so many times. That's one of the titles, my servant the branch. So the beast, the Antichrist, comes as the pseudo-Christ, the false Messiah, the counterfeit. And so here Isaiah would be saying, no, you are a loathed branch. You're not the Messiah. You are an abomination. You are a counterfeit. You're a liar. You are Antichrist. So I think that that actually is interesting either way. If he was using an Egyptian loanword, an abominable dead god is obviously very interesting. If he's not, calling him a loathed branch, when we know that the Messiah, the true Messiah, Jesus Christ, is called my servant the branch, calling him a loathed branch would, I think, give a pretty strong indication that this individual here is the Antichrist. So I just want to make that comment on this word here in Isaiah. So reading again the passage, I'll start from the beginning. "All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb. But you are cast out away from your grave like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land, you have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with cities." Now this is the other point that I wanted to comment on, as there are some who believe that Isaiah here, the word cities, is using an Aramaic loanword. And if that's the case, this word in Aramaic means watchers. Watchers, like Genesis 6 watchers. So that would read, "Prepare slaughter for his sons because of the guilt of their fathers." So be thinking Genesis 6. "Lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with watchers." So personally, I like that one. I think that one's more significant than the question of whether it's a loathed branch or an abominable dead god, because it would just make a lot more sense to me for Isaiah, because as I explained, I think loathed branch makes good sense in as a title for the Antichrist. This last sentence here, I think, makes good sense when it's linked with Genesis 6. "Prepare slaughter for his sons," which would be the Nephilim, because of the guilt of their fathers, which would be the sons of God, lest they rise and possess the earth and fill the face of the world with watchers, which would be, again, Nephilim, Rephaim, these kinds of entities. So I think that is an interesting one, and again, a linkage here with Nahum, that we have, again, one verse, and largely base a lot of that part off of one sentence. I will make your grave for you are vile. From Nahum 1:14. So our last verse for today is verse 15, Nahum 1:15. It says, "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace. Keep your feasts, O Judah, fulfill your vows, for never again shall Belial pass through you. He is utterly cut off." So this verse is a very important verse in the book of Nahum. We have here both the gospel and the cutting off of Belial. So the gospel there, the feet of him who brings good news, that's the, in the New Testament, that's translated the gospel. That's the gospel there. And then after that, we have, obviously, Belial there at the end of the verse. He's utterly cut off. He's going to be judged. Which reminds me of Jesus' words in John 12:31, where Jesus said, "Now shall the prince of this world be cast out." And if you are one who takes, takes Belial as both a term for Satan and the Antichrist, as I would tend to do, we see here either way, the judgment, the death of the one who takes divine power to himself. Satan has tried to kill, his desire has been to kill God and take his place. We went through Isaiah 14, the 5 I wills. And then Jesus tells the Pharisees, "The lust of your father you will do." He was a murderer from the beginning. And what was the lust of Satan? Was to kill Jesus, was to kill Yahweh and take his place. Satan to want to become the second power in heaven, to become the cloud rider. So Jesus is telling the Pharisees, the lust of your father you will do, telling them that basically you will kill me. You will kill the cloud rider. You will kill the second power in heaven, which is what your father, the devil, wanted. But, he obviously knew that Jesus obviously knew that that's why he came. He came to die, knowing he wouldn't stay dead, knowing that on the third day he would take his life back. "I have the authority to lay it down. I have the authority to take it again," he said in John 10. So the idea that the one who takes divine power to himself, Belial, will be utterly cut off. I think you could apply that either to Satan or to the beast. So the first word here in verse 15, "behold," this word serves as a signal announcing a sudden shift from judgment to salvation. And the reference to the messenger's feet indicates the swiftness in which he moves. And when the Holy Spirit moves, he moves quickly. And the word for peace here is shalom. Shalom is the Hebraic greeting that conveys good health and fullness of blessing. Right? The Apostle Paul would open his letters with grace and peace. And Nahum here quotes with minor changes Isaiah 52 verse 7, which says, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns." And Paul here quotes Isaiah's version of this in Romans 10 verse 15. And so the difference between these two, between Isaiah and Nahum, is that Isaiah says, "How beautiful are the feet," while Nahum says, "Behold the feet." And the difference there, the reason for that difference is theological. Isaiah is focusing on the positive side of salvation, salvation which comes to rescue those who trust in the Lord, who trust Yahweh, who trust Jesus Christ. I mean, ultimately, Paul takes that in Romans 10. Nahum is focusing on the negative, the negative side, which announces the destruction of Yahweh's enemies. So in this passage in Nahum, "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him who brings good news," and that good news is the destruction of Belial. It's the destruction of the oppressor. It's the destruction of the enemies of God. And so that is the good news that this messenger is bringing. So it's talking about the salvation of God's people, of those who trust in the Lord, from the idea of that's coming because of the destruction of the enemies, right? So salvation comes to us. Jesus died, and in dying, he destroyed death, he destroyed sin, he destroyed the work of the devil. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the work of the devil, 1 John. So to the one, it's beautiful, but to the other, to the one being saved, the one who trusts the Lord, it's beautiful. Behold, the beautiful are the feet. But to the other, the ones who are in rebellion, behold the feet. So the end of rebellion is destruction. And Paul's use of this statement takes its application far beyond the immediate context of either Isaiah or Nahum. And the gospel message that the preachers announce that Paul's talking about is the deliverance from all the oppression that comes as a consequence of sin, Satan, and death through the blood of Christ. And Peter picks this up in Acts 10:34 through 36 when he says, "Now I truly understand that God doesn't show favoritism, but in every nation the person who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. He sent the message to the Israelites proclaiming the good news of peace through Jesus Christ. He is Lord of all." And Paul uses a similar phrase in his famous Armor of God passage in Ephesians 6:14 and 15. The Apostle Paul says, "Stand therefore with truth like a belt around your waist, righteousness like armor on your chest, and your feet sandaled with readiness for the gospel of peace." So as Isaiah and Nahum are talking about the feet of the one who brings good news, who brings the gospel, the Apostle Paul takes that and again is talking about it in Ephesians 6 where he's saying, make sure, and he's talking to the church obviously, so this is applicable to us, this is a message for us, make sure your feet are sandaled, make sure your feet are ready to carry the gospel of peace, just like these messengers in Isaiah, that Isaiah is talking about and Nahum's talking about. Nahum also mentions the festivals. Celebrate your festivals or your feasts, O Judah. And so the festivals that Nahum is mentioning are the three required annual festivals: Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. And historically, Passover was celebrated in Jerusalem in the days of King Josiah after the Assyrian domination ended. So some scholars believe the immediate fulfillment of this message in Nahum was fulfilled in the days of Josiah, which is recorded in 2 Kings 23, verses 21 to 25, where Josiah led Judah and also whoever was willing to come from the remainder of the north, the Israelites who were left in the north. Josiah invited all of them, and not very many of them came, but some did. So they celebrated the Passover in those days. And obviously the Passover represents deliverance from slavery. So ultimately this was fulfilled at the death of Christ, the substitutionary blood of the Lamb of God. And the Feast of Weeks celebrates the newness and fullness of life, and this is fulfilled ultimately this was fulfilled at Pentecost when the Holy Spirit was given to each and every believer. And the Feast of Booths, or Tabernacles, as it's probably more often called, reminds us of God's continual provision for his people as we are on our pilgrimage through life. And this festival has a yet future ultimate fulfillment. It will be celebrated when Christ rules in Jerusalem. And it's recorded for us in Zechariah 14, verse 16, which says, "Then all who survive from all the nations that came to attack Jerusalem will go up annually to worship the King, Yahweh, who rules over all, and to observe the Feast of Tabernacles." So Jerome, interestingly, he applied this section of this verse in Nahum, when Nahum's talking about the festivals, Jerome interpreted this as a comfort to the church suffering under Roman persecution. As I've mentioned multiple times, the church has interpreted Nahum, and before the church, even the community at Qumran, and those who translated the Targum that I read earlier, it's been a consistent theme that people have interpreted Nahum as a comfort to them during their periods of oppression. So it's interesting, again, as we look at Nahum and we read all these things about judgment and the divine warrior marching out to battle, that believers through the ages have interpreted that as comfort, which is, again, the meaning of the name Nahum, comfort or comforter. And it's been interpreted, interestingly, as Nahum's name suggests or means throughout the ages. So Jerome went on to interpret further that one day the Lord will put an end to the persecution, and the church, like Judah before her, will celebrate its feasts with spiritual joys. So this leaves the last piece here. Belial will be utterly cut off. How do we understand the words of Nahum? Since Israel and Judah were oppressed by many nations throughout history, and the people of God are likewise oppressed and persecuted in many places of the world today. And as I mentioned before in our study today, that the ultimate meaning of Nahum's prophecy is found when interpreted in an eschatological sense. Belial was defeated at the cross and the empty tomb, and he will be totally cut off and killed by Jesus when he returns.